The city exhaled a plume of gray breath into the November air, a chill that bit through wool and settled deep in the bones. From her small bakery smelling of yeast and cinnamon, Arya watched the world hurry past, a river of hunched shoulders and downturned faces. Her own problems were a quiet weight. Rent was late, the mixer was failing, but her heart had a stubborn warmth that refused to be extinguished. It was this warmth that drew her gaze to the little girl standing alone across the street. She couldn't have been more than 6, a tiny, solitary figure in a prim navy coat, her dark curls escaping a velvet headband. She stood frozen, her small hands balled into fists, her chin trembling as the wind whipped around the corner. There was no parent, no nanny, just the child and the encroaching cold. Arya's chest tightened. Forgetting the batch of cooling brioche, she untied her apron. She grabbed the worn crimson scarf from the hook by the door, a gift from her grandmother, knitted with more love than skill, and stepped out into the biting wind. She crossed the street, her steps quick and determined. The girl looked up, her eyes wide and dark, the color of a midnight sea, reflecting the city's harsh lights. They were old eyes in a young face, already acquainted with a world that left little girls waiting on cold corners. Arya knelt, her voice soft. "Are you cold, Piccolina?" The girl gave a single sharp nod, a tear threatening to spill down her porcelain cheek. Without another word, Arya gently wrapped the crimson scarf around the girl's neck, tucking the ends into her coat. The wool was soft against her pale skin, a splash of vibrant life against the bleakness of the day. "There," Arya whispered, smiling. "That's better." From inside a black idling sedan parked 50 feet away, Rocco the Shadow King Veltri watched the entire exchange. He saw the flash of red, the gentle hands, the smile that asked for nothing in return. His world was one of transactions, of debts owed and paid in blood. Kindness was a currency he neither traded nor understood. He was late picking up his daughter, Liliana, delayed by a business that had ended with a grim finality in a warehouse by the docks. Guilt, a rare and unwelcome visitor, gnawed at him. But as he watched this woman, this stranger, offer his child a piece of her own warmth, something else shifted within his chest. It was a feeling so foreign he couldn't name it, a crack in the permafrost that had encased his heart since his wife's murder. He saw the genuine compassion in her eyes, a light in the gloom of his existence. He didn't see a baker. He saw an anomaly, an angel in a city of devils. And in that moment Rocco Veltri, a man who took whatever he wanted, decided he wanted her. He wanted to own that light, to keep it, to see if it could possibly warm him too. His driver, waiting for the signal to move, glanced in the rearview mirror. "Boss." Rocco didn't answer. He just watched as Arya gave his daughter one last pat on the shoulder before turning to go back to her little shop, oblivious to the fact that her simple act of kindness had just sealed her fate. The Shadow King had seen her, and he would not forget. It took Rocco less than a day to learn everything about Arya Cappelletti. The bakery, Pain di Vita, had been in her family for 3 generations. It was struggling, buried under a mountain of debt to a loan shark who, conveniently, was already in Rocco's pocket. The building's landlord was a man who understood the value of loyalty to the Veltri family. All the pieces were there, a constellation of misfortune Rocco could easily arrange to his liking. He didn't send flowers. He sent 2 of his men, dressed in suits so sharp they could cut glass. They didn't threaten. They simply explained the reality of her situation. The debt due in full. The eviction notice, effective immediately. Her world crumbled in the space of 10 minutes, the scent of baking bread turning to the bitter smell of ash in her mouth. She stood amidst her flour-dusted counters, her defiance a flickering flame against a hurricane. "I'll get the money," she insisted, her voice shaking but firm. The larger of the 2 men, his face a roadmap of old fights, simply smiled a smile devoid of all warmth. "The debt's been bought." The landlord's changed his mind. "You have a new benefactor." An hour later, the black sedan he'd watched her from pulled up to the curb. Rocco Veltri stepped out, a monolith of power and menace wrapped in a cashmere overcoat. He moved with a predator's grace, his presence sucking the very air from the street. He entered her bakery, the little bell above the door chiming a cheerful, obscene lie. He looked at her, his dark eyes sweeping over her as if he were appraising a masterpiece he intended to acquire. "Arya Cappelletti," he said. his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "You have a choice. You can lose everything you have ever known. Or you can come with me," fear warred with fury inside her. "Who are you? What do you want?" He stepped closer, the scent of expensive cologne and cold danger clinging to him. "I want to solve your problems. In return, you will live in my home. You will be under my protection." It was not a request. It was a decree. A transaction. Her bakery, her life in exchange for her freedom. She was being claimed like a territory in a mob war. He saw the fire in her eyes, the way her chin lifted. He expected tears, pleading. He was pleased by the resistance. "And my protection," he added, his voice dropping to a possessive whisper that traced a chill down her spine, "is absolute, with no other path visible, with the ghosts of her parents and grandparents weeping in the corners of the shop she was about to lose." She gave a single clipped nod. As she was led from her life and into his, she felt the phantom warmth of a crimson scarf, a simple act of kindness that had become the price of her soul. The Veltri Villa was a palace of marble and shadows, a monument to wealth and power built on a foundation of fear. It sat perched on a hill overlooking the city, a fortress of cold opulence. For Arya it was a gilded cage. Servants moved like specters through cavernous rooms filled with priceless art in heavy, oppressive silence. Her own suite of rooms was larger than her entire apartment, with a balcony that offered a breathtaking view of the prison walls. On her second day, while wandering the desolate, manicured gardens, she found the source of the villa's one true light. Liliana was sitting on a stone bench, trying to teach a fat, disinterested bumblebee to dance on her fingertip. She looked up as Arya approached, her dark eyes lighting with recognition. "The scarf lady," the girl said, her voice a small, clear bell. The crimson scarf was gone, replaced by clothes worth more than Arya's entire wardrobe, but the vulnerability in her eyes was the same. "My name is Arya," she said, sitting beside the child. "And yours is Liliana." A tentative friendship was born in that garden, nurtured over stolen hours playing hide-and-seek among the rose bushes and reading stories in a sun-drenched library. Liliana, a child starved for maternal warmth, clung to Arya. And Arya, adrift in a cold, dangerous sea, clung to the child as her only lifeboat. Rocco watched them from the shadows of his study window. He saw Arya braid Liliana's hair, her fingers gentle and sure. He heard their shared laughter echoing in halls that had been silent for years. He saw the way his daughter, who often flinched from his own touch, would melt into Arya's embrace. This woman, this baker, was breathing life back into the dead spaces of his home, of his family. His consigliere Leo, a man whose loyalty was etched into his weary face, stood beside him one afternoon, observing the pair in the garden. "She is good for the child, Rocco," Leo said, his tone cautious. "But she is a complication. The other families, your own men, they see a civilian in the lion's den. They see a weakness." Rocco's jaw tightened. "They see what I allow them to see," but he knew Leo was right. Every moment he spent observing Arya, every spark of warmth she ignited in him, was a deviation from the code. It was a vulnerability. And in his world, vulnerability was a death sentence. Yet he couldn't bring himself to stop watching. He was a king in a cold, empty castle, and she was the only fire in the hearth. The nights in the villa were the longest. That was when the silence was loudest, filled with the ghosts of Rocco's past and the chilling reality of Arya's present. One night, a piercing scream shattered the quiet. It was Liliana. Arya was out of her bed in an instant, her heart pounding as she ran down the marble hallway to the child's room. She found Liliana thrashing in her bed, tangled in silk sheets, her face pale with terror. "The shadows," the girl sobbed. "They were coming for me." Arya sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the trembling child into her arms, rocking her gently. She began to hum, a simple soft lullaby her own mother used to sing, a melody of home and safety. Her voice was not perfect, but it was steady and full of a tenderness that filled the room. The door creaked open. Rocco stood in the threshold, a formidable silhouette against the dim hallway light. He had been drawn by the scream, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun he kept on his nightstand. But the sight before him stopped him cold. Arya, in a simple white nightgown, holding his daughter, her voice a soothing balm in the darkness. The scene was so profoundly peaceful, so domestic, It felt like a dagger to his heart. It was everything he had lost, everything he thought he could never have again. Liliana's sobs subsided into soft hiccups, her breathing evening out as she drifted back to sleep in the safety of Arya's arms. Arya gently laid her back on the pillow, tucking the covers around her. When she turned, Rocco was still there, his expression unreadable. He stepped into the room, his presence immense. "She still has nightmares about her mother," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. "The doctors gave her pills. They did not work." Arya looked from the sleeping child to the broken man before her. For the first time she didn't see the monster, the captor. She saw a grieving husband, a helpless father. "Sometimes," she said softly, "a song works better than medicine." He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching. The air between them crackled with an unspoken energy. "You are not afraid of me," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I'm terrified of you," she confessed, her voice a whisper. "But I'm not afraid for your daughter." His gaze fell upon her, intense and searching. He saw the strength beneath her fear, the compassion that was not a weakness but a weapon, one that was disarming him completely. "Thank you, Arya," he murmured, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. It was the first time he had used her name with anything other than command. In that quiet, moonlit room the dynamic shifted. The captor and the captive were gone, replaced by a man and a woman, bound by the sleeping child between them. The crack in his armor had just splintered into a fissure. From the moment Rocco Veltri brought a civilian baker into his home, Bruno Veltri, his cousin and underboss, began to plot. Bruno was a man carved from ambition and resentment. He had the Veltri name but had always lived in Rocco's shadow, a place that had curdled his loyalty into a venomous jealousy. He saw Arya not as a woman, but as a symptom of a disease weakening the family. Rocco, the fearsome Shadow King, was being tamed by a baker's daughter. It was an insult to their legacy, and more importantly, a perfect opportunity. Bruno moved through the family's ranks like a whisper, planting seeds of doubt. "The boss is distracted," he'd murmur to a capo over espresso. "His mind is not on our business. It is in the nursery." He began to engineer problems. A shipment of contraband went missing at the docks, a clear challenge from the rival Falcone family that required a swift, brutal response. But Rocco's response, while effective, was a day late. He had been at the villa, watching Liliana and Arya plant daisies in the garden. Bruno seized on the delay. He called a clandestine meeting of the most powerful soldiers. "He risks all of us for her," Bruno hissed, his voice laced with false concern. "This woman, this outsider, will be our ruin. His judgment is clouded by her presence. Is this the king we should follow to our graves?" He then turned his attention to Arya herself, observing her with a reptilian stillness. He noted the sadness that still clung to her, the way she sometimes stared out at the city as if memorizing a life she'd lost. He saw her loneliness, her isolation, and in that he found his weapon. One afternoon, as she was walking near the villa's perimeter, he approached her. His smile was a carefully constructed mask of sympathy. "It must be difficult," he said, his tone smooth as oil, "to be so far from everything you knew. Your old friends. Your neighborhood." Arya stiffened, her guard immediately up. "My place is here now," Bruno chuckled softly. "Of course. But if you ever needed to get a message to someone, to let them know you are well, I could help." Rocco can be possessive. He might not understand it was a trap, baited with the one thing she craved, a connection to her past. She looked at him, her intelligent eyes searching his. She saw the lie coiled behind his feigned kindness. "Thank you, Bruno," she said, her voice cool and dismissive. "But I have everything I need right here." She walked away, leaving him standing there, his smile finally slipping. He had underestimated her. No matter. If she would not be his pawn, she would be his sacrifice. He would find another way to make her the architect of Rocco's downfall. The annual syndicate gala was the one night of the year when the heads of the 5 families declared a truce, meeting under the gilded chandeliers of the Excelsior Hotel to trade lies and veiled threats. It was a serpent's nest, and Rocco was about to walk into it with Arya on his arm. He presented her with a box. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a gown of emerald silk that seemed spun from moonlight and envy. and a diamond necklace that glittered with cold fire. "You will be my queen tonight," he commanded, his voice a low growl of possession. "You will stand by my side, and you will show them all that you belong to me dressed in the borrowed splendor." Arya felt like a sacrificial offering. The necklace was heavy on her skin, a beautiful glittering leash. As they entered the ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. Every eye was on her, the mysterious woman on the arm of the Shadow King. The whispers were immediate, a tide of venomous speculation. Rocco ignored them, his hand a firm proprietary brand on the small of her back. He led her to the dance floor as the orchestra began a smoldering tango. His hold was powerful, guiding her through the intricate steps with a grace that belied his brutal nature. "They are watching us," Arya whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Let them watch," Rocco murmured against her ear, his breath warm. "Tonight you are not a captive. You are a statement. You are my strength, not my weakness. Capisci." For a moment, caught in the intensity of his gaze and the intoxicating rhythm of the dance, she believed him. They were the eye of the hurricane, a pocket of dangerous calm while the storm raged around them. Then Bruno cut in. It was his right as underboss. With a stiff nod to Rocco, he took Arya's hand. His touch was clammy, his smile predatory. "You dance beautifully," Bruno said, his voice low. For a baker, the insult was clear, a deliberate jab at her origins, meant to humiliate her and by extension Rocco. Arya's chin lifted. "It's amazing what one can learn when not spending all one's time plotting in shadows." Bruno's eyes narrowed, his mask of civility slipping. Before he could retort, Rocco was there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply placed a hand on Bruno's shoulder, his grip like steel. "My cousin," Rocco said, his voice dangerously soft. "You forget your place." He pulled Arya back to him, his message to the entire room as clear as the diamonds at her throat. She was his. To insult her was to insult him. And no one insulted the king and lived to boast of it. The gala had been a declaration, and in the weeks that followed, the space between captor and captive dissolved into something far more complicated and intoxicating. In the quiet hours of the night, they found each other. Stolen conversations on the balcony became whispered confessions. He told her of the betrayal that had scarred his soul, the ambush that had taken his wife and left him with a heart of stone. She, in turn, told him of her dreams, of the simple life she had cherished, a life he had stolen but was inadvertently replacing with something terrifying and beautiful. He took her to a hidden part of the estate, a walled garden where wild blood-red roses grew, tangled and beautiful. "I planted these for my late wife," he confessed, his voice thick with memory. "After she died, I let them grow wild. I couldn't bear to look at them." He reached out and touched a velvety petal. "You came and it is as if the sun is on them again. You bring life back to this place, Arya. Tu sei la mia vita. You are my life." Her heart ached with the raw vulnerability in his voice. She was falling for him, this monster, this king, this broken man. She was beginning to believe that this gilded cage could be a home. That was when Bruno's trap finally sprang. He had been patient. He had manufactured a trail of breadcrumbs so convincing it would fool the devil himself. He used a burner phone to send cryptic messages to Antonio Falcone, the head of the rival family, messages containing minor but strategic details about Veltri shipping routes. Then he planted the phone, wrapped in a cheap scarf, not Arya's but similar enough to be evocative, in the back of her closet, hidden beneath her old, simple clothes from the bakery. He made his move when Rocco was at his most vulnerable, in the afterglow of his confession in the rose garden. He approached Rocco in his study, his face a mask of grave sorrow. "Rocco, there is something you must see. I pray to God I am wrong." He presented security footage, cleverly edited, showing a shadowy figure, indistinguishable but female, near the villa's east wall, the only spot with a known blind spot. Then he presented the phone records. Finally, with feigned reluctance, he led Rocco to Arya's room, to the closet where the burner phone was hidden. When Rocco's hand closed around the cheap plastic, his world tilted on its axis. Betrayal. The one sin he could not forgive. The ghost of his first wife, murdered by a traitor in his own ranks, rose up to choke him. The warmth Arya had kindled in his soul was extinguished, replaced by an Arctic rage. The man who had just called her his life was gone. In his place stood the Shadow King, and he was coming for his queen. The confrontation was not in the study or a cold dungeon. It was in the rose garden, the place of his greatest vulnerability. He waited for her there, the burner phone clutched in his hand like a weapon. When Arya arrived, smiling, her face glowing from the hope he had given her, the sight of his expression made her blood run cold. The tenderness was gone, replaced by a glacial fury that was more terrifying than any physical threat. "What is this?" he snarled, throwing the phone onto the stone bench between them. It clattered, an obscene noise in the tranquil garden. Arya stared at it, bewildered. I don't know what that is, liar." The word was a gunshot. He advanced on her, his immense frame radiating a killing cold. "Did you think I was a fool? That I could be so easily blinded by a pretty face and a kind word? Did Falcone promise you a return to your simple life in exchange for mine?" The accusation was so monstrous, so far from the truth, that it stole her breath. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not now. Her fear was a living thing, but her spirit, the one he had been so drawn to, would not break. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage that matched his own. "You talk of betrayal? You who ripped me from my life, who holds me prisoner in this beautiful cage and then dares to call it love. I have given you the only thing I had left, my trust. And you spit on it because of this. This piece of plastic." Her emotional insight, her gift, saw past his rage to the wounded animal beneath. "This isn't about me," she realized, her voice gaining strength. "This is about her. Your wife. You're so terrified of being betrayed again that you would rather believe I am a monster than believe you could be happy." Her words struck him like a physical blow. He flinched, the fury in his eyes flickering with confusion and pain. He was a king lost in a maze of his own making, and her truth was a light he couldn't bear. As the fragile world they had built shattered around them, Leo the consigliere burst into the garden, his face pale and grim. "Rocco, stop. You are making a mistake." In his hand, he held a small digital recorder. "I have been watching Bruno for weeks. He has grown too ambitious, too hungry. I had his office swept this morning." He pressed a button. Bruno's voice filled the air, slick and confident, speaking to one of his co-conspirators. "The phone is planted. When Rocco finds it, his grief will make him blind. He will destroy the girl, and in the chaos his own capos will see him as unstable, an emotional wreck. They will turn to me. The family will be mine by week's end." The truth descended upon the garden with a devastating weight. Rocco stared at Arya, at the righteous fury and deep hurt in her eyes, and the full scope of his monstrous error crashed down upon him. He had almost destroyed the one pure thing in his life, all because he was a slave to his own ghosts. The king was a fool. Rocco Veltri moved with the terrible swiftness of a storm front. The rage he had directed at Arya now had a true target, and it was focused, absolute and lethal. He found Bruno in the villa's wine cellar, admiring a bottle of vintage Barolo as if he were already master of the house. He didn't see Rocco approach until the cellar door slammed shut, the heavy oak echoing like a coffin lid. Bruno turned, the bottle slipping from his grasp and shattering on the stone floor. A splash of deep red pooling like blood. Rocco didn't speak. He didn't need to. In his eyes, Bruno saw his own death. The reckoning was not a prolonged affair. It was brutal, primal, and it adhered to the oldest laws of their world. A traitor's debt is paid in full. When it was over, Rocco stood over his cousin, his knuckles bloodied, his suit immaculate. He felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not remorse. Just a vast, hollow emptiness where his rage had been. He walked from the cellar, leaving the cleanup to his most trusted men, and went back to the rose garden. Arya was still there, sitting on the stone bench, wrapped in a silence more profound than any scream. She did not look up as he approached. He stopped before her, the Shadow King stripped of his crown, the monster without his armor. He was just a man, blood on his hands and a gaping wound in his soul. "Arya," he began, his voice raw, broken. He knelt before her, an act of supplication so foreign to him it felt like breaking a bone. He took her hands in his. They were cold. I have no words to excuse what I have done. My past. It lives in me like a poison. I saw betrayal where there was only loyalty. I saw a lie where there was only truth. I almost destroyed you because I am a coward. He looked up at her, his dark eyes shimmering with an unshed agony. I do not deserve your forgiveness. I do not deserve you. But I am asking for it anyway. Perdonami, tesoro mio. He reached into his coat and pulled out not a weapon, but a simple old key. The key to the front gate. This is your freedom, he said, placing it in her palm. You can walk out of here right now. I will arrange for your bakery to be restored, your debts cleared. You can have your old life back. I will never bother you again. He paused, his heart a stone in his chest. Or, you can stay. Not as my captive, but as my partner. My queen. My heart. Stay and help me be the man you see, not the monster I have been. Stay and be a mother to my daughter. The choice is yours. And whatever you choose, I will honor it. He remained kneeling, a king at her mercy, waiting for her verdict. Arya looked down at the key in her palm. It felt heavy, a tangible weight of a life she once craved. She looked at the man kneeling before her, stripped of his power, offering her the one thing she thought she'd never have again, a choice. She saw the blood on his knuckles and the desperation in his eyes. He was a paradox, a killer with the heart of a poet, a tyrant who loved with the force of a tempest. Her old life was simple, safe. This life with him would never be safe. It would be a constant dance on the edge of a knife. But her old life was also empty now. It didn't have Liliana's laughter. It didn't have the soul-searing intensity of his gaze, or the impossible tenderness of his touch in a moonlit garden. She closed her hand around the key, her fingers curling over the cold metal. Then she reached out her other hand and gently touched his cheek, her thumb wiping away a speck of blood. A king should not kneel, she said softly. Rocco's breath hitched. He looked into her eyes and saw not fear or pity, but an incredible resilient strength. He saw her choice. He rose slowly, pulling her to her feet, and drew her into an embrace that was not about possession, but about sanctuary. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent of cinnamon and courage. I will spend the rest of my life earning this, he vowed. Their reign began not with a coronation, but with a quiet promise in a rose garden. Rocco Veltri did not cease to be the Shadow King. The city still whispered his name in fear. But the shadows in his own heart began to recede. Arya was his consigliera, his conscience, his queen. Her compassion became his compass. He began to rule with a brutal sort of justice, tempered by a wisdom that was not his own. The Veltri family became stronger, not through fear alone, but through a fierce, unshakable loyalty that radiated from the throne. Their evenings were not filled with plotting and violence, but with Liliana's bedtime stories and the quiet comfort of two souls who had found their harbor in a storm. One afternoon, standing on the balcony overlooking the city, Arya wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her head against his strong back. Below in the garden, Liliana was chasing butterflies, her laughter carrying on the wind. The world was still dangerous. Enemies still plotted in the dark. But here in his arms was a kingdom of its own. He had taken her to be his possession, a light to hoard in his darkness. But she had done the impossible. She had not just survived his world, she had remade it. And you who have journeyed into this heart of darkness and light, you must wonder, can a love born from such violence truly conquer all? Can a king's redemption, bought with blood and devotion, ever truly be complete? The greatest love stories are rarely simple fairy tales. They are forged in fire. Tell me, what battles have you fought for love? Share your story and remember that even in the deepest shadows, a single act of kindness can be enough to light up the world.